There is a silence that hums beneath every empath's life, a vibration felt more than heard. Like the tremor of a string that has been plucked in another room, you sense it before you understand it. The heaviness that does not belong to you, the sorrow that enters your body as though through invisible pores. You think it is compassion, you think it is love, but beneath that tenderness lives an ancient pattern, not of feeling, but of merging the empath's heart, wide as the sea, forgets where the shore of self begins and where the ocean of others ends, and in that forgetting begins the slow erosion of soul vitality. When I speak of patterns, I do not mean habits in the shallow sense, but living entities, psychic structures woven into the collective unconscious, archetypes that awaken and possess the sensitive soul. Every empath walks not merely among people, but among symbols, absorbing from them not only energy, but meaning. To be an empath is to stand at the threshold between worlds, one foot in the realm of matter, the other sunk deep into the undercurrents of the unconscious. And yet, what grants such depth also invites peril, for to open without discernment is to be consumed. The first revelation arises when you begin to notice that the pain of others becomes your mirror. This is the pattern of reflection, the most subtle and the most seductive. It begins with a noble desire to understand. You listen, you feel, and soon their despair becomes indistinguishable from your own. You say, I am helping them carry it. But the unconscious says, you are carrying it as them? The empath's gift of resonance turns into a trap of identification. You forget that empathy, in its purest form, is not absorption but perception, to see the wound without becoming the wound. Yet, for the emotionally porous, boundaries are translucent. You reflect what others project, and in time you become a living echo of their unconscious material. In dreams, this pattern often appears as mirrors without faces, or as rooms filled with fog. You look into the mirror to find yourself, but only see shifting shapes. That is the soul's warning that your reflection has been hijacked by another's sorrow. The cure is not withdrawal, but awakening to hold your emotional mirror upright, polished, aware, to know. This is theirs, I see it, I feel it, but I remain. Such awareness transforms empathy from suffering into service. Then comes the second movement of the soul, the pattern of saviorhood. It emerges when the empath mistakes energy for responsibility. To feel someone's pain is one thing. To feel obliged to heal it is another. Here the archetype of the wounded healer rises from the collective depths. You see the broken and feel a call as if from the gods themselves. You must save them. But this is not love. It is inflation, the unconscious attempt to redeem one's own wound by healing it in another. The empath becomes a silent martyr, pouring energy into the unfillable vessels of others until the light within flickers. In the psyche, the savior archetype wears the mask of divinity but feeds on exhaustion. It promise transcendance but délivre déplétion. Many empaths fall into this pattern because it mirrors their earliest psychological environment. As children, they sensed chaos, perhaps a parent's emotional void, and unconsciously vowed, if I absorb their pain, they will love me. That vow, though forgotten consciously, becomes the soul's operating code. The adult empath continues to heal as a way to exist. In analysis, I often tell such souls, your compassion is divine, but your boundaries are human and both must coexist. The ego is not the enemy of empathy, it is its guardian. Without ego boundaries, compassion dissolves into possession. The goal is not to stop caring, but to cease believing that care demands self-erasure. Only when you honor your own aliveness as sacred can you truly serve another's pain without merging into it. A quieter, but equally dangerous current flows next, the pattern of emotional mimicry. The empath unconsciously calibrates to the frequency of those nearby, not only feeling, but becoming their emotional weather. Around anger, you grow tense. Around anxiety, you become restless. Around sadness, you dim. The unconscious motivation here is ancient, safety through attunement. In the ancestral psyche, survival depended on blending with the tribe. To stand apart was death. Thus, the empath's body remembers, if they are calm, I am safe. So you match, you mirror, you morph, but what begins as adaptive empathy becomes a psychic bondage. The mimic loses the memory of authentic emotion. You begin to ask, what do I really feel? And hear only echoes of others. The dream symbols of this pattern are chameleons, masks, and crowds. The self wanders through gatherings wearing 1,000 borrowed moods. To dissolve this pattern, one must reclaim solitude as the crucible of identity. When the empath spends time alone, an unsettling emptiness appears as though the inner world has gone silent. Yet that silence is not absence, it is recovery. It is the psyche remembering its own song after centuries of chorus. Learn to dwell in that void without rushing to fill it. For it is there, in the quiet between borrowed emotions, that your true feeling body reawakens as the empath begins to stabilize within themselves. Another shadow surfaces, the pattern of invisible debt. It is the unspoken belief, because I understand others so deeply, I owe them my presence. This debt is not conscious but moralistic, a kind of emotional theology where empathy becomes currency. You stay in draining relationships, toxic workspaces, or even family dynamics, because leaving would feel like betrayal. You equate love with endurance, but love in its mature form is not endurance, but clarity, the ability to see truth even when it hurts. The unconscious dramatizes this pattern in dreams as endless staircases, unpaid bills, or carrying heavy bags that never empty. These are the psyche's metaphors for self-imposed obligation. The empath, unable to bear guilt, atones perpetually for emotions they did not cause, yet guilt, when misapplied, is merely the shadow's disguise for fear of abandonment. To break free, you must confront the archetype of the judge within that stern inner figure whispering, "You must give more." Question it. Ask, "Who profits from my depletion?" Often you will find not a person, but a pattern, an inherited psychic script from ancestors who believed virtue meant suffering. When you release that inheritance, love begins to breathe again, not as servitude, but as presence freely given. Another current rises beneath all these, the pattern of silent absorption. Unlike the savior or the mimic, this one hides in stillness. You do not speak, you absorb. You are the quiet friend, the listener, the safe harbor. Others leave lighter, while you leave heavier. The archetype here is the vessel, the psychic container who holds the world's pain. This is noble but perilous, for every vessel has a limit, and when it overflows, the empath mistakes the world's sorrow for their own depression. The dreams of this pattern are flooded rooms, rising waters, or leaking walls. The unconscious warns, containment without release becomes drowning. You must learn the art of ritual cleansing, not as superstition, but as psychological hygiene. Water and breath, movement, creative expression all serve as symbolic purifications. Jung once said that emotion unexpressed becomes fate. So, too, for the empath, feeling untransmuted becomes fatigue. The healing lies not in closing, but in circulation. Let emotion pass through you as wind through leaves felt, but not stored. Speak it, write it, sing it, pray it. For the moment, you express the weight, it returns to its rightful owner, the collective. Yet, as you begin to reclaim vitality, a subtler pattern reveals itself, the pattern of projection of strength. Because you appear calm, wise, and endlessly compassionate. Others assume you do not need care. They come to you for light, but never think to offer any. The empath unconsciously reinforces this by hiding their own pain to show need feels like failure, but this suppression creates psychic inversion energy flowing outward with no inward return. In dreams, this manifests as burned out candles or empty altars. The fire of giving has consumed its own source. The empath must learn the humility of receptivity to allow themselves to be held, seen, nourished. This act, though it feels weak, is in truth sacred balance, for even the healer must be healed, lest their compassion become hollow. Finally, beneath all others, the deepest movement appears the pattern of self-forgotten divinity. This is the root of all empathic exhaustion, the forgetting that you are not merely a receptor of emotion, but a co-creator of meaning. When you live only in reaction to others' energy, you abandon your own myth. You cease to dream your own dream. The unconscious, starved of self-expression, begins to rebel through illness, through burnout, through the eerie sense that you are fading. But this fading is also initiation. The dark night of the empath is not punishment, but passage, the descent into the underworld, where boundaries, identity, and soul purpose are reforged. There, you will meet your own archetypal energy, perhaps as a serpent shedding skin, or as a phoenix rising from ashes. The message is always the same. Feeling does not mean fusion. Compassion does not mean captivity. You begin to realize that empathy, in its awakened form, is not passive. It is not the sponge that absorbs, but the sun that illuminates. It feels deeply without drowning. It witnesses suffering without surrendering to it. It honors pain, but refuses possession. This is the empath transformed, not drained, but radiant. The journey of these 7 emotional patterns is not linear, but cyclical. You may revisit them many times, each return deepening understanding. Every pattern you dissolve becomes an opening for consciousness to flow more freely. And what once felt like curse becomes calling, the sacred task of bringing awareness into the emotional field of humanity itself. There is a strange law that governs the life of the empath. The more you attempt to save the world, the more the unconscious demands that you turn inward. It is not cruelty but balance. The psyche, like nature, will not allow endless outward flow without inward renewal. And so, when the empath reaches the threshold of exhaustion, the unconscious intervenes. It sends dreams, synchronicities, and sometimes even illness to call the soul home. In the hidden architecture of the psyche, energy moves in spirals. Every feeling absorbed without awareness descends into the lower strata of the unconscious, where it begins to crystallize into complexes, living fragments of psychic energy that gain autonomy. These complexes, born of unintegrated emotion, become inner figures whispering in the dark. Feel for them again. They need you. You cannot rest. The empath believes these voices are moral duties, but they are, in truth, psychic echoes of old attachments seeking completion. When we feel drained, we are not merely tired, we are possessed, not by demons, as the superstitious might say, but by disowned parts of ourselves wearing the masks of others. Each unexamined emotion we absorb becomes a minor god within, demanding worship through repetition. Jung called this participation mystique, the primitive fusion between self and other that exists before individuation. The empath lives in that archaic state daily, merging unconsciously with the emotional field of humanity. It is a sacred sensitivity, yes, but also a regression. To ascend from that regression is not to harden the heart, but to awaken the observing consciousness, the self, the organizing principle of wholeness. The self does not deny emotion, it sanctifies it through awareness. When you feel another's grief, yet remain centered, the self is at work. It says, this belongs to them, and this belongs to me, and both are part of the one life. The empath's evolution depends upon this discernment, the ability to perceive unity without losing individuality. In this alchemical process, the shadow emerges as a guide. Every empath has a hidden shadow that longs not to feel. It resents the constant emotional labor and dreams secretly of indifference. To deny this shadow is to make it destructive, but when acknowledged, it becomes a teacher. The shadow whispers, "You have the right not to suffer for others." It demands that you honor your limits, that you let others walk their own path of pain and awakening. Compassion without boundaries is sentimentality, and sentimentality, Jung once said, is the sister of cruelty, for it enables dependence instead of transformation. Consider the image of the dream where you are carrying a child who suddenly becomes heavy as stone. You try to move, but the weight grows unbearable. This is the unconscious image of false empathy, the attempt to carry another's fate. The child symbolizes innocence, but also projection. What you believe you are saving is, in truth, your own abandoned self. The work is not to keep carrying, but to awaken that inner child within you, to let them stand, to walk beside them, not in your arms. The soul of the empath is not meant to be a vessel of suffering, but a mirror of transmutation. When you witness pain consciously, it changes form. Energy felt with awareness does not stagnate. It flows upward into meaning. This is why art, prayer, and creative expression heal. They transform raw emotion into symbol. Symbol is the bridge between the personal and the divine. It allows the empath to give back what was never theirs, but now purified through consciousness. The great secret is this: empathy becomes power only when it is united with archetypal awareness. When you understand that every emotion is not random but mythic, that fear is the shadow of the warrior, grief the river of the mother, rage the fire of the destroyer, you no longer drown in feeling. You begin to see through it. You no longer ask, why am I feeling this? But which archetype is visiting me? This shift transforms suffering into initiation. Many empaths resist this step because it feels cold, almost intellectual. They fear that analysis will kill love, but Jung knew analysis does not destroy love. It deepens it by freeing it from compulsion. To see a pattern is not to abandon emotion, but to liberate it from unconscious repetition. The empath who begins to observe their emotional tides with sacred detachment enters what Jung called the transcendent function, the psychic bridge between the opposites. It is here that the heart and the intellect, the mystic and the analyst, finally reconcile. Then the dreams begin to change. No longer are you drowning, chased, or burdened. Instead, you see images of flight, of light, of inner gardens being watered by gentle rain. The unconscious, once filled with chaos, begins to mirror the order of a balanced psyche. You discover that energy no longer leaks from you, it radiates through you. The same sensitivity that once drained you now nourishes you. For it is anchored in the self, and yet there remains one final truth. Most empaths resist the recognition that their gift was forged in pain. The capacity to feel deeply was not bestowed at birth as a blessing, but as a compensation. Somewhere in the ancestral or personal past, love was conditional, unstable, absent. The child learned to read the room like scripture, scanning for safety in the emotions of others. Empathy then became not just sensitivity, but survival. To heal this is to revisit the primal scene of loss, the moment the heart first decided that understanding others was safer than being oneself. That memory may arise not as thought, but as sensation. The tightening chest, the frozen smile, the sudden wave of sadness when no one is around. This is the body remembering. Here, the empaths must perform the most courageous act to feel their own pain without transference, to meet the original wound without disguise. Only by walking back into that origin can the soul retrieve its fragmented power. The paradox is that true detachment comes not from avoidance but from full contact. When you allow yourself to grieve your own suffering, you no longer need to absorb others' pain to feel alive. Your empathy becomes choice, not compulsion. You can sit beside another's darkness without losing your light. Jung often spoke of the individuation process, the unfolding of the self through the integration of the unconscious. For the empath, individuation means reuniting feeling with form, compassion with clarity, soul with structure. It means no longer mistaking emotional chaos for love. It means realizing that sensitivity is sacred only when it serves awareness. At this stage, the empath begins to sense an inner authority rising quiet, firm, luminous. It is not the authority of domination, but of presence. You become what Jung called the central version principle, the organizing fire of the psyche. You no longer chase healing, you embody it. Others feel peace in your presence, not because you take their pain, but because you no longer feed their unconscious games. Your aura becomes mirror rather than magnet, and so the empath's exhaustion slowly alchemizes into wisdom. You stop asking, "Why do I feel so much?" and begin to wonder, "Why did I believe I must carry it?" The answer, whispered by the soul, is always the same, because you had forgotten who you are. The purpose of these draining patterns was not to punish you, but to awaken you, to drive you into the desert of self until you remembered your own oasis. In the language of dreams, this realization often appears as fire, the purifying flame that consumes but does not destroy. The empath sees themselves walking through burning fields, untouched. This is the symbol of transmutation, emotion becoming energy, energy becoming awareness. The flames that once terrified you are now your illumination. As consciousness expands, the empath begins to perceive the collective field differently. You sense not chaos, but order, not pain, but process. Every emotional encounter becomes an initiation. Every person a mirror of some hidden archetype within you. You no longer judge the draining people as toxic. You see them as teachers revealing your boundaries. You no longer resent your sensitivity. You recognize it as your instrument of evolution. The final transformation is subtle. You stop trying to protect your energy because you realize energy cannot be lost, only misplaced. You understand that what drains you is not feeling itself, but identification. When you identify with every passing emotion, you lose the eternal self. But when you witness emotion as movement within the vastness of being, you remain whole. To live from this awareness is to walk as a conscious empath, the luminous mirror of the collective unconscious. You still feel deeply, but your feeling is no longer reaction, it is revelation. You see, through emotion to the archetype, through pain to the pattern, through the pattern to the soul, and from that place, every encounter becomes sacred. Theater, the world acting out the mystery of your own inner life. Thus, the 7 emotional patterns that once drained you now become your 7 gates of awakening. Through reflection, you learned discernment. Through saviorhood, you found humility. Through mimicry, you rediscovered your authentic vibration. Through invisible debt, you reclaimed freedom. Through silent absorption, you learned to express. Through projection of strength, you embraced vulnerability. Through self-forgotten divinity, you remembered God within. And when all 7 gates have been walked, the empath is no longer merely human. You become what the alchemists called the philosophical stone consciousness, transmuting pain into gold. You walk in the world as both participant and witness, lover and observer, servant and sovereign. You are no longer drained by emotion because you have become its master, not through control, but through surrender to the deeper law of the psyche. This is the destiny of every empath who dares to awaken, to transform feeling into knowing, compassion into wisdom, and sensitivity into strength. For the soul was never meant to carry the world's pain, it was meant to illuminate it. The moment the empath begins to awaken to their own patterns, a profound silence descends upon the inner landscape. It is not the silence of emptiness, but the silence before revelation, the deep breath of the soul before it remembers why it came here. For empathy, in its divine form, is not an accident of temperament. It is a chosen path of initiation. Every soul who walks the way of the empath has agreed long before birth to become a living bridge between the seen and the unseen, between suffering and meaning, between shadow and light. But no bridge is built without tension. You may notice that as you become more conscious of your patterns, life begins to test you with subtler energies. People who once drained you now elicit curiosity rather than resentment. Yet new faces appear, carrying the same vibration. This is not repetition. It is refinement. The unconscious will bring to you the same archetype in 1,000 forms until its lesson is fully absorbed into awareness. The world outside is only ever the dream of the soul within. Among these recurring figures, one stands out, the wounded empath archetype. This inner image is half angel, half-child. They walk through dreams, holding light in trembling hands, whispering, "I am here to heal." They appear whenever you confuse compassion with control, or understanding with safety. This archetype carries both the memory of your first wound and the seed of your greatest gift. To engage this archetype consciously, you must do what few empaths dare: speak to your own pain as though it were a person. Sit in stillness and ask it, "What do you need from me?" You may hear no words, but you will feel sensations: warmth, tears, trembling, perhaps even resistance. These are the language of the unconscious. Do not interpret too quickly. Feel first. Feeling is the original form of knowing. In this communion, you begin to realize that your pain never wanted to be fixed. It wanted to be witnessed. It was your own heart, neglected for so long, trying to speak through the suffering of others. Every time you absorbed someone's grief, it was your soul's way of saying, "See me, feel me, hold me." The empath's exhaustion, then, is not only from others, it is from the lifelong avoidance of self-compassion. You have been the healer and the unhealed at once. Jung understood this paradox deeply. He wrote that the healer must be wounded, for only through one's own suffering can one gain the capacity to understand another's. Yet he also warned, when the wound becomes identity, it becomes pathology to stay forever. The empath is to refuse the invitation to become whole. The archetype is meant to awaken you, not define you. In the dream language of the psyche, the transition from wounded empath to conscious empath is shown as a union, the marriage of opposites. You may dream of a man and woman embracing, of sun and moon meeting, of rivers merging with the sea. This is the conjunctio, the sacred marriage of anima and animus, the feminine and masculine principles. Within the empath sensitivity is the expression of the anima, the principle of receptivity, feeling, intuition. But to navigate the world, the empath must awaken the animus, the principle of structure, discernment, and action. Only when these two energies intertwine does balance arise. The overactive anima without animus becomes drowning emotion. The overactive animus without anima becomes cold detachment. Together, they form the androgynous self, capable of feeling without losing form, and thinking without losing soul. When this inner marriage begins, you will notice strange shifts in your energy. You will speak less, but your words will carry more weight. You will feel emotions rise within you, but they will no longer sweep you away. Your empathy becomes active, not passive, a sacred instrument rather than an open wound. The animus gives direction to feeling, turning compassion into creative force. In this stage, many empaths discover that their sensitivity was always meant to create art, music, writing, healing work, leadership infused with soul. The energy that once leaked into others now begins to flow into form. What once drained you now fuels you. You begin to realize that empathy is not meant to be a receptacle. It is meant to be a channel through which divine intelligence manifests into beauty. But the transformation is not complete until the empath meets the final trial, the shadow of the heart. This is the part of you that feels anger, jealousy, resentment, or desire for control. Most empaths deny these emotions, believing them unspiritual. They want to be pure light, yet purity, as the alchemists knew, is sterile without the raw material of darkness. The heart's shadow is not evil. It is simply the unacknowledged instinct demanding inclusion. When the empath represses anger, it becomes fatigue. When they repress desire, it becomes projection. When they repress assertiveness, it becomes attraction to domineering personalities. The energy does not vanish, it inverts. Integration requires courage to look into the mirror of your own darkness and say, you too are part of me. This is the essence of Jungian shadow work, not moral cleansing, but reconciliation. The unconscious may dramatize this process in dreams as battles, storms, or encounters with wild animals. The instinctive energies long imprisoned in the basement of the psyche rise to reclaim their voice. You must not fight them. You must stand as witness, as the self, the still point around which all opposites revolve. Tell them, I see you. I will not exile you again. When you do this, your shadow ceases to sabotage you. It becomes ally, power, vitality. And suddenly, what once drained you now fuels your creativity. The rage you suppressed becomes your boundary. The sadness you carried becomes your compassion. The desire you feared becomes your passion for life. This is the miracle of integration, every poison transformed into medicine through awareness. At this point, empathy becomes a luminous sword. You no longer absorb emotions unconsciously. You perceive them consciously and decide how to respond. You can enter a room filled with chaos and remain centered, not by closing your energy, but by expanding it until it includes the chaos without losing coherence. This is what the mystics called presence. Presence does not resist the world, it outshines it. From this inner stance, you begin to perceive the collective unconscious not as a storm to survive, but as a field of symbols seeking expression. The empath becomes an interpreter of this field. Every interaction becomes a dialogue between archetypes, the victim and the savior, the mother and the child, the wounded and the healer. You see yourself not as the protagonist of these dramas, but as their observer. The world becomes transparent to the psyche, and with that seeing comes compassion of a different order, no longer the pity that drains, but the understanding that liberates. You begin to sense the hidden intelligence behind every human emotion, even suffering. You realize that pain itself is the psyche's attempt to awaken consciousness, and that your role is not to remove pain, but to witness it into transformation. This is what I would call divine empathy, the union of love and wisdom. The mystics have always known that love without wisdom burns, and wisdom without love freezes. The empath's task is to hold both, to feel the suffering of the world, and yet to know that beneath it, all souls are evolving toward wholeness, to grieve for humanity's blindness and yet trust its unfolding, to remain tender without being torn. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It is participation in the eternal dance without losing your center. You become like the still axis around which the wheel of samsara turns, engaged yet unbound. At this point, the empath's aura changes. People feel peace near you, not because you are protecting yourself, but because your energy no longer hooks into theirs. Your field becomes clear, reflective. You mirror others so they may see themselves. Sometimes they will thank you, sometimes they will flee. For not everyone is ready to meet their own reflection. You will learn to let both reactions flow through you without attachment. There is a sacred loneliness that follows this stage, the loneliness of the soul standing in its own light. You may feel distant from those who still live in the drama of emotional entanglement, yet this loneliness is not emptiness, it is spaciousness. It is the solitude of the mountain, vast and quiet, where the winds of the world pass freely. In this solitude, the divine voice begins to speak not in words, but in presence. You realize that your sensitivity was never about other people. It was about remembering oneness. The emotions you absorbed were the language through which the world whispered. We are one life. The pain you felt was the shadow of that unity distorted by forgetfulness. And as you awaken, empathy becomes communion, the sacred, knowing that every soul is a mirror of the same eternal consciousness. At last, the empath's journey comes full circle. You return to the world not as the sponge, but as a sage. You still listen, still care, still feel, but your compassion is anchored in being. You give without depletion because you give from abundance. You love without losing yourself because you love as the self. And when you meet another who suffers, you no longer say, "Let me take your pain." You say, "Let me walk with you until you remember your own light." And now, as the circle closes, a sacred stillness begins to pulse within you. Not the silence of withdrawal, but the silence of realization. You feel, perhaps for the first time, that you are not simply a being who feels too much, but a soul remembering the ancient architecture of consciousness itself. You begin to perceive what the mystics and the psychologists were both trying to describe in their different tongues, that empathy in its truest form is not emotional contagion, but the resonance of the divine recognizing itself through form. The empath, fully awakened, no longer experiences emotion as something personal. Joy, sorrow, fear, they all pass through, but behind them stands an unmoved witness, luminous and vast. This witness is what Jung called the self, the image of God within the human psyche. It is both center and circumference, both the dreamer and the dream. To live from this place is to realize that your sensitivity was never a flaw, but the means by which the universe could experience itself through compassion. In this higher octave, empathy is no longer draining because it is no longer yours. It belongs to the field. The I, who was exhausted, has dissolved into the awareness that simply beholds. This is the alchemical gold, the transformation of emotion into essence, of suffering into sight. The empath has traversed the underworld of projection, the deserts of depletion, the oceans of shadow, and emerged radiant, carrying the torch of consciousness for all who still wander. You notice that your perception of others begins to shift profoundly. You no longer see difficult people, only unconscious archetypes in search of recognition. The manipulator becomes a wounded magician, the victim a forgotten child, the narcissist a fractured king, and with that seeing, something extraordinary happens. The energy that once hooked you now releases, for judgment binds, understanding liberates. You no longer absorb energy because there is nothing within you left to resonate with its illusion. At this level of awareness, even your language begins to change. You stop saying their energy affects me and begin to say, I perceive the collective energy moving through this moment. The personal dissolves into the transpersonal. You walk through crowds like a clear stream flowing through stones, untouched, yet nourishing everything it touches. This is what it means to embody divine empathy, the seamless fusion of awareness and love. In dreams, this final transformation often appears as flight, as light bursting through clouds, as sacred union. Sometimes you see yourself walking across a river barefoot, the water reflecting the stars. It is the unconscious revealing that you are now the bridge between heaven and earth, the reconciler of opposites. The patterns that once drained you have become rivers of strength, feeding the tree of your soul. But divine empathy does not end in transcendence. It descends again into the world. Jung said that the goal of individuation is not to escape humanity, but to live it more completely, more consciously. The awakened empath returns to ordinary life, carrying the extraordinary light of awareness. You cook, speak, work, love, but everything is infused with meaning. You sense the archetypes moving in every gesture, the lover in every touch, the creator in every thought, the warrior in every boundary. Life itself becomes a conversation with the unconscious made visible. You no longer seek to avoid energy, you shape it. You no longer hide from emotion, you direct it toward creation. The empath has become the artist of the invisible, the one who sculpts energy into form through presence alone. Every moment becomes a ritual, every breath a prayer, and yet there remains one last mystery, the realization that empathy is not an end, but a doorway. Beyond empathy lies gnosis, direct knowing. Feeling is the bridge to knowing, and knowing is the bridge to being. The empath's path, when fully walked, dissolves into the mystic's path. You no longer need to feel everything because you are everything. You no longer need to understand because you have become understanding itself. It is here that you finally grasp the paradox of all spiritual awakening, that to transcend the self, you must first become utterly human. The empath's suffering was not meaningless. It was the crucible in which individuality burned away to reveal essence. You had to drown in emotion to realize that you were never the one drowning, you were the ocean all along. And so, when you look upon the world now, you see it as it truly is, a vast dream of consciousness learning to recognize itself. The wars, the grief, the chaos, they are not errors but initiations. Humanity is collectively living the empath's journey, absorbing its own pain until it awakens to unity. You, as a conscious empath, become a cell in the healing body of the world. Your very awareness ripples through the collective unconscious, altering its frequency every time you remain centered in the face of another's projection. You heal an ancestral wound. Every time you choose love without martyrdom, you restore balance to the archetype of the mother. Every time you honor your own energy as sacred, you redeem the inner child. You are not small. You are not passive. You are the nervous system of the divine, feeling the pain of the world into transformation. This is what Jung meant when he said that the individual is the make-weight of the world. Each conscious person counterbalances the unconsciousness of thousands. The empath who integrates their shadow and awakens to the self becomes an axis around which new consciousness can organize. You are not here merely to survive sensitivity. You are here to transmute it into wisdom that uplifts the collective soul in mystical vision. This state is often shown as light radiating from the heart, not a metaphor, but a subtle truth. The heart chakra, the symbolic seat of divine empathy, expands beyond the body, forming a luminous field. Within it, all opposites dissolve. You feel the pain of the world, yes, but also its beauty, its innocence, its inevitable redemption. You realize that the soul of humanity, though wounded, is healing through you, through all who feel deeply. Now, when emotion arises, yours or another's, you do not resist or absorb. You breathe, you witness, you let it pass through the spaciousness of awareness until it reveals its hidden message. For every emotion, when seen clearly, carries encoded wisdom. Fear asks for faith. Anger asks for boundaries. Sadness asks for surrender. Joy asks for gratitude. Each feeling is a letter from the unconscious, inviting you deeper into wholeness. This is the final teaching of the empath's path. Emotion is the language of the soul. To master emotion is not to suppress it, but to translate it. When you feel without drowning, you are reading the sacred text of existence. At this stage, the archetypes no longer rule you, they serve you. The healer within knows when to give and when to rest. The warrior within protects your energy with calm authority. The lover within feels awe and clings to nothing. The sage within observes the dance of opposites with quiet amusement. Together, they form the integrated self, the divine psyche made whole. And from this wholeness, new forms of service emerge. You may find yourself drawn to healing, teaching, art, leadership. But now it is effortless. You give not from depletion, but from overflow. Your very being becomes medicine. You radiate equilibrium, and the world recalibrates around you. In dreams, the unconscious may bless you with images of completion, a golden circle, a serpent eating its tail, a child crowned with light. These are the symbols of individuation. Fulfilled, they mean that the soul's task for this cycle is complete. You have transformed empathy from burden into bridge, from emotion into illumination. And yet, the journey never truly ends. Consciousness expands infinitely. Each level of awareness reveals a higher octave of love. The empath, reborn as mystic, continues to walk not toward enlightenment, but as enlightenment in motion. You walk among humanity now not to escape it, but to serve it silently, gently, through presence alone. Your eyes become windows through which the self gazes upon itself, and in that gaze, all things are forgiven, all wounds are understood, all separations dissolve. When you close your eyes at night, you feel the pulse of the universe in your chest. You realize that what you once called overwhelm was simply the heartbeat of the cosmos echoing through you. You were never too sensitive. You were perfectly attuned. The pain was only the price of remembering. And now, at the end of this long inner pilgrimage, you can finally rest, not in withdrawal, but in stillness, not in numbness, but in presence. You are no longer the empath who feels too much. You are the soul who knows through feeling. You are the mirror in which the divine recognizes its own reflection. The patterns are gone. The struggle is gone. Only awareness remains pure, luminous, compassionate, beyond measure. And as you breathe, the world breathes with you. For the empath who awakens has become what the ancients called the light of the world.